Have you ever accepted an umbrella from a stranger in the rain? If that umbrella is red, give it back immediately. According to an old Japanese legend, that umbrella was never meant to keep you dry. It exists to guide a wandering spirit back home. And once that spirit finds its way, you will become the one left behind. Kyoto, Japan, late November. The season of crimson maple leaves was coming to an end. Heavy gray clouds hung low over the ancient city, swallowing what little light remained. Aiko Tanaka, 24 years old, worked at a small bookstore tucked away in Kyoto's historic Gion district. Her life was quiet and predictable. She spent her days arranging books, serving tea to regular customers, and locking up the shop every evening at 7 o'clock. That night, the last customer stayed later than usual. By the time Aiko slid the wooden doors shut, rain suddenly poured from the sky without warning. At first, it was only a drizzle. Within a minute, the narrow streets were engulfed in sheets of rain. She searched through her bag. No umbrella. Her phone battery had dropped to 1%. The last bus had already left 10 minutes earlier, and her apartment was nearly 3 kilometers away. She had no choice but to walk. The lantern-lit streets of Gion, usually crowded with tourists during the day, were now completely deserted. Only the soft glow of red paper lanterns flickered in the wind. The sound of wooden sandals echoed somewhere in the distance. Wind chimes swayed gently beneath old rooftops. Rainwater streamed from ancient tiles into the stone gutters below. Every sound blended into an eerie melody that made the entire city feel strangely alive. After 10 minutes, the rain became even heavier. Her clothes were soaked through, and the cold wind cut straight through her jacket. Then she noticed something unusual. A small shrine stood quietly beneath a grove of crimson maple trees. She froze. She had walked this street hundreds of times before. She had never seen this shrine. Its weathered wooden gate leaned slightly to one side. Moss covered the stone lanterns guarding the entrance. An old bronze bell swayed gently in the wind. Desperate to escape the rain, Aiko stepped beneath the shrine's roof. The air smelled of damp cedar wood and fading incense. No one was there. At least, that was what she thought. "Don't let the rain touch you." The voice was soft, almost a whisper. Aiko spun around. Standing only a few steps behind her was a woman dressed in a pure white kimono. Something about her was terribly wrong. Her long black hair was perfectly dry despite the storm. Not a single drop of rain clung to her clothing. Her skin was pale like porcelain, almost unnaturally white. Her dark eyes seemed to absorb every trace of light around them. In her hands she held a traditional Japanese paper umbrella. It was a deep crimson red. Without another word, the woman slowly extended the umbrella toward Aiko. Out of instinct, Aiko bowed politely and accepted it. The instant her fingers touched the wooden handle, an icy chill shot through her entire body. It wasn't the cold of rain. It felt like touching something that had rested beneath frozen water for decades. Aiko looked up, ready to thank the mysterious woman. She was gone. The shrine courtyard was empty. Only the endless sound of rain remained. Startled, Aiko hurried outside and searched the street. No one, no footsteps, no movement, no sign that anyone had ever been there. She forced herself to laugh nervously, convincing herself she must have imagined it because she was exhausted. Taking a deep breath, she opened the red umbrella. The moment it spread above her head, something impossible happened. Rain continued to pour from the sky, yet not a single drop landed on the umbrella. Every raindrop curved away just before making contact, as though an invisible barrier surrounded it. The walk home became unnervingly silent. The traffic had disappeared. There were no voices, no passing bicycles, only the sound of her own footsteps splashing against the wet pavement. Then she noticed something. The footsteps no longer matched her own. She stopped walking. Her footsteps stopped. But another pair continued, 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, directly behind her. Her heartbeat pounded inside her ears. Slowly she turned around. The street was completely empty. Nothing stood behind her except the endless curtain of rain. Terrified, Aiko gripped the umbrella tighter and almost ran the rest of the way home. When she finally reached her apartment, the old wall clock read exactly 11:11 p.m. She placed the red umbrella beside the front door, locked both deadbolts, closed every curtain, and tried to convince herself that the night was finally over. She had no idea that the moment the apartment lights went out, the red umbrella slowly opened by itself, just a few inches, and from the darkness beneath its crimson canopy, a pale white hand quietly reached out. That night, Aiko woke to a faint sound. Drip, drip, drip. It was not the sound of rain. It sounded like water falling onto the wooden floor. She opened her eyes. The room was completely dark. The digital clock beside her bed displayed 3:33 a.m. The dripping continued from the living room. Aiko reached for her phone, but the battery had died after she returned home. Taking a deep breath, she climbed out of bed and followed the dim light coming through the window. Every step across the wooden floor produced a long, creaking sound. Her small apartment, normally warm and familiar, suddenly felt strange and unfamiliar. The dripping grew louder as she approached the living room, but when she turned on the light, the floor was completely dry. There were no puddles and no traces of rainwater. Only the red umbrella remained. It was no longer standing beside the front door. It now lay open in the middle of the living room. Aiko froze. She clearly remembered leaving it closed. A cold gust of wind suddenly swept through the apartment, even though every window was shut. The red paper canopy trembled slightly, as though someone were touching it from the inside. Gathering all her courage, Aiko stepped closer. She reached down and grabbed the wooden handle. Just as she was about to close the umbrella, a faint voice whispered directly beside her ear, "Don't!" Aiko gasped and released it. The umbrella immediately folded shut by itself. The apartment fell silent. The dripping stopped. Aiko remained awake until sunrise. The next morning, she tried to convince herself that everything had been a hallucination caused by exhaustion and lack of sleep. On her way to work, she stopped at an antique shop. The owner was a man in his 70s who was well known throughout the neighborhood for his knowledge of traditional Japanese objects. He stared at the red umbrella for a long time. His calm expression slowly changed. He did not touch it. Instead, he took a step backward. "Where did you get this umbrella?" Aiko told him about the woman at the shrine and the strange events inside her apartment. The old man immediately fell silent. After a long pause, he spoke in a low voice. "Some objects do not belong to the living." He looked directly into Aiko's eyes. "Do not take it home again." Aiko tried to ask him what he knew, but he only shook his head and closed the wooden door, clearly refusing to continue the conversation. That evening, the rain returned. This time it was even heavier than the night before. Before leaving the bookstore, Aiko locked the red umbrella inside her storage cabinet. She bought a cheap, transparent umbrella from a nearby shop and walked home. Throughout the entire journey, nothing unusual happened. There were no footsteps behind her, no shadowy figures, no feeling that someone was watching. Aiko allowed herself to smile. Perhaps the old man had been right. As long as she stayed away from the red umbrella, everything would return to normal. But when she opened the door to her apartment, her body went cold. The red umbrella was standing beside the shoe rack. It was perfectly dry and completely clean. The transparent umbrella she had just purchased was gone. That night, Aiko decided to install an old security camera that her father had once given her. She positioned it directly across from the entrance, pointing it toward the red umbrella. Then she went to bed. The following morning, the camera had recorded nearly 8 hours of footage. Aiko fast-forwarded through the video. Nothing happened for most of the night. Then the timestamp reached exactly 3:33 a.m. The image began to flicker, the picture twisted and distorted. Slowly, the red umbrella opened by itself. There was no wind, no hand touched it, no one appeared to be holding it. Then a pair of pale, bare feet stepped out from the darkness beneath the canopy. The hem of a white kimono followed. Long black hair hung down to the floor, completely covering the figure's face. The woman did not walk across the floor. She floated silently toward Aiko's bedroom. The camera could not capture her face. But just before she disappeared from view, the woman stopped. Slowly, she turned her head and looked directly into the camera. The entire screen immediately filled with white static. The recording ended. Aiko felt an icy chill spread through her body. She rushed into the bedroom. No one was there. Everything appeared untouched. But on the mirror beside her bed, a sentence had been written in water. "I have found you." Aiko stumbled backward in terror. Within seconds, the letters began to dissolve. Water streamed down the glass like tears before disappearing completely, leaving no trace behind. That night, for the first time since receiving the umbrella, Aiko was too afraid to turn off the lights. She sat curled up on her bed, staring at the bedroom door until morning approached. As her eyelids slowly grew heavy, she heard a woman quietly singing. It was an ancient melody, slow, sad, and the sound was coming from inside the red umbrella. The following morning, Aiko did not go to the bookstore. She had not slept all night. Only one question remained in her mind. Who was that woman, and why had she chosen her? The red umbrella stood silently beside the door. From a distance, it looked like an ordinary antique. But every time Aiko approached it, the temperature inside the apartment dropped noticeably. The air became so cold that her breath formed a thin white mist. She decided to return to the place where she had met the woman during the storm. The street looked exactly as it always had. Tea houses, wooden buildings, red lanterns hanging along the narrow road. But the shrine was gone. In its place was an empty patch of land covered in weeds. There was no gate, no stone lanterns, no bronze bell. Nothing suggested that a shrine had ever stood there. Aiko remained there for a long time, staring at the empty ground. An elderly woman selling flowers nearby noticed the red umbrella in Aiko's hand and suddenly dropped an entire basket of white chrysanthemums. Her face turned pale. She whispered something under her breath before quickly pulling Aiko into the flower shop. The old woman shut the door and drew the curtains as though she were afraid someone outside might be watching. "Where did you get that umbrella?" Aiko told her everything. The storm, the woman in the white kimono, the umbrella, the security camera, the message written on the mirror. The more Aiko revealed, the more troubled the old woman became. After a long silence, she opened a drawer and removed an old photograph yellowed with age. The picture showed a young woman dressed in a white bridal kimono. In her hands, she held a red umbrella identical to Aiko's. A name was written on the back of the photograph, Yumi Nakamura. Beneath it was a date, June 17th, 1974. According to the old woman, more than 50 years earlier, Yumi had been the daughter of the most famous traditional umbrella-making family in Kyoto. Her wedding day was also the day of the heaviest rainfall the city had seen in decades. On the way to the shrine for the ceremony, the wedding procession had to cross an old wooden bridge. At that exact moment, a sudden flash flood struck. The bridge collapsed. Yumi was swept away by the river. Her body was never found, but what happened afterward was even more disturbing. From that night on, local people began seeing a bride in a white kimono appear during heavy rain. She always carried a red umbrella. She always smiled. And she always offered the umbrella to people walking alone. At first, no one suspected anything. Those who accepted it continued living normally for exactly 7 days. On the 7th night, they disappeared without leaving a trace. The only thing left behind was the red umbrella, perfectly dry, placed outside their front door. Aiko struggled to remain calm. "Has anyone ever survived?" The old woman fell silent. Then she nodded very slowly. "Only one person." She took out an old journal filled with yellowed pages. It had belonged to a monk who once cared for the vanished shrine. In the final lines he had written, "Yumi does not harm people out of hatred. She is only searching for someone to take her place and return home." Aiko frowned. "Take her place and return home?" The old woman let out a quiet breath. "Those who die in the rain and are never brought to their final resting place will continue wandering between two worlds." She looked toward the red umbrella. To escape, they must find a living soul willing to step onto their path. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "The red umbrella is the doorway." That afternoon, Aiko returned to her apartment and decided to burn it. She carried the umbrella onto the balcony, poured fuel over the red paper, and struck a match. Flames erupted across the canopy, but only seconds later the fire suddenly went out. The red paper remained untouched. It was not burned, not blackened, it was not even warm. At that moment the bright sky turned dark. Rain began to fall, fast, heavy. Violent wind forced the balcony door open. The red umbrella opened by itself and stood upright in the middle of the balcony without anyone holding it. Then, slowly, a woman in a white kimono stepped out from beneath its canopy. For the first time, Aiko saw her face clearly. It was not horrifying. It was the face of a not covered in blood. It was the face of a young woman. Her eyes were red from crying. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Her lips moved as though she were begging for help, but no sound came out. Then her face began to change. Her pale skin turned gray. Her eyes became completely black. Her mouth stretched open far beyond what was humanly possible. Her neck twisted sharply to one side. Water poured continuously from her hair as though her body had just been pulled from the bottom of a river. Aiko screamed and stumbled backward, slipping onto the floor. When she looked up again, the woman was gone. Only the red umbrella remained, closed. Ilse. One set of footprints led into the apartment, the other led out. The footprints leading away were smaller, much smaller. They looked like the footprints of a child. At that exact moment, Aiko's phone vibrated. A security alert appeared on the screen. Motion detected inside the apartment, but Aiko was already standing inside it. The phone would not stop vibrating. Security alerts appeared one after another. 3:12 a.m. Motion detected. 3:13 a.m. Motion detected. 3:14 a.m. Motion detected. Aiko looked around the apartment. There was no one there except her, but the camera kept reporting movement. With trembling hands, she opened the security app. The live feed showed the living room. The red umbrella was still lying in the center of the room. Nothing appeared to be moving. Then a dark figure slowly passed behind the camera. The app immediately identified it. One person detected. Aiko spun around. There was no one behind her. When she looked back at the phone, the message had changed. 2 people detected. One was Aiko. The other was standing directly behind her, less than half a meter away. Aiko did not have the courage to turn around again. Cold sweat ran down her back as she stared at the screen. The woman in the white kimono slowly leaned toward her. Her face moved so close that it almost touched Aiko's shoulder. Her pale lips opened. For the first time, Aiko clearly heard her voice. "Please, take me home." The phone screen went black. Every light in the apartment suddenly went out. Outside, rain began pouring down with terrifying force. Thunder echoed across Kyoto. The red umbrella opened by itself and slowly turned toward the front door, as though inviting Aiko to follow. She remembered the old woman's warning. The umbrella will always lead the chosen one back to where everything began. Without fully understanding why, Aiko stepped after it. The streets were completely deserted. There were no cars, no pedestrians, only the sound of rain and the distant echo of wooden sandals. The red umbrella floated several meters ahead of her, moving slowly as though held by an invisible hand. It led Aiko away from the old district through narrow alleyways and finally stopped before an abandoned wooden bridge crossing the Kamo River. The bridge had been closed for years. Its rotting planks were covered in green moss. This was where Yumi had disappeared more than 50 years earlier. At the center of the bridge, a young woman in a white kimono stood with her back turned. She no longer looked like the horrifying corpse Aiko had seen in the apartment. She looked like a lonely bride, silent, alone. Rain passed through her body as though she were made of mist. Yumi slowly turned around. Her eyes were red from crying. Behind her was not the river Aiko expected to see. Instead, dozens of shadowy figures stood beneath the dark water. Men, women, elderly people, children. Every one of them held a red umbrella. Every one of them stared at Aiko without blinking. Yumi bowed her head. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but the tear was black. Then she extended one hand toward Aiko. In that moment, Aiko finally understood. Yumi had never wanted to kill anyone. For more than half a century, she had been trapped between 2 worlds. Every person who accepted the umbrella had been drawn to this bridge. Those who panicked and tried to escape became new spirits trapped beneath the river. But if someone had the courage to face Yumi, the curse might finally be broken. Aiko walked slowly toward the bride. Each step felt heavier than the last. Only a few meters remained between them. Yumi trembled as she offered Aiko the red umbrella. Aiko did not take it. Instead, she gently reached forward and held Yumi's freezing hand. For the first time in more than 50 years, someone touched her without fear, not out of terror, but out of compassion. The moment their hands met, a burst of white light erupted through the rain. Crying, wind, rushing water, every sound filled the night at once. The spirits beneath the river began dissolving into countless points of light. One by one, they vanished. Yumi's face slowly returned to the way it had looked in the old photograph. She was once again a gentle young woman with a peaceful smile. She bowed deeply and whispered, "Thank you." Then she faded into the rain. The red umbrella began to decay. Its bamboo frame snapped apart. Its paper canopy broke into crimson petals that scattered into the wind. The rain stopped. Dawn slowly brightened the sky. 3 months later, Aiko's life had returned to normal. There were no more nightmares, no singing at 3:33 in the morning, no figures appearing in mirrors. She left her job at the bookstore and moved to another city, hoping to forget everything that had happened. Then, one afternoon at the beginning of winter, while she was waiting for a train, a boy of about 8 years old approached her. He was holding a red paper umbrella. "Excuse me," he said. "A woman in white asked me to give this to you." Aiko's heart stopped. She turned around. Among the crowd stood a woman in a white kimono beneath the falling rain. Her long hair covered her face. But she was not Yumi. She was taller, thinner. Her kimono was old and torn. In one hand she held another red umbrella. The woman tilted her head and smiled. Then she disappeared into the rain. Aiko looked down at the umbrella the boy had given her. Inside the crimson canopy, faded black writing covered the paper. "The keeper of the umbrella is only one among many curses." Beneath the sentence was a long list of names. The final name had only just appeared: Aiko Tanaka. The umbrella trembled in her hands. Somewhere far away, hidden beneath the returning rain, a woman whispered, "This time, it is your turn."